And welcome back, Mindsetters. I hope you had a nice little break and made sure that you did whatever you had to do. You went to the bathroom, you went to go get some juice, whatever you had to do to make sure that you're back, ready, and paying attention. So make sure you've got your pens and pads out and you're ready to make notes because we're about to continue with the rest of the show. And this is where Elsa takes it away. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Ty. All right, guys, like we said, now let's go on to angiosperms and go through a few points of these flowering plants. Okay, they are commonly known as flowering plants, which means now that they form flowers, yes. And when they form flowers, they're going to produce fruit. And inside the fruit, we're going to have seeds. So it's a flowering plant, but a seed-bearing plant because they produce fruit. These are the most advanced plants. They're most advanced in the sense that they've got so many features that make them so successful. Like they have true roots, true stems, they've got seeds. They're well adapted to terrestrial life. They're well adapted to so many different types of environments. So they are the most advanced group of plants. If we started with bacteria, we moved on to protists, we moved on to moss, the fern, and now we're on to the last and the biggest group of plants, the flowering plants. They have varying cuticles, meaning that some cuticles will be thin, some cuticles will be a bit thicker, depending on in which environment they are growing. If you think about the xerophytes, which are the plants growing in the desert, they need a thick cuticle to restore water and to maintain the water inside the plant so they don't dry out quickly. All right. Then, like I said, now they're found in all types of environments. Now, there are three groups from grade 10, if you can remember the three groups. All right, we have got the hydrophytes. The hydrophytes. Okay, now remember the word phytes mean plants. Hydro come from the word water. So these are plants that grow in water. So they can also form flowers. Okay, then we have the mesophytes. Mesophytes are plants that grow on land. They grow on, they're the plants that you find everywhere, except in the water and in the desert. So they are your moderate plants. Okay, then you find the xerophytes. Xerophytes, which are the plants, now as the word xero says, that they need very little water, or they can store their water inside their leaves, inside their stems. So they are known as the plants that grow in the desert. All right, the xerophytes. So those are the three groups of plants that you get living in different environments. These plants have got a complex vascular system, just like we had in the gymnosperm, meaning that they have proper xylem and phloem. Now, being very advanced, these plants can grow very, very big, very, very tall. Think of some oak trees that are huge. These plants need a good support system, which is done by the xylem, and they also need to transport a vast amount of water, which is also the xylem. And they need to transport a lot of food, so they have got a very good system to transport water and food. Right, seeds develop inside the ovary. And that ovary now is going to be inside the fruit, and we're going to say that these seeds are covered. So that's a feature of angiosperms, that they are covered seeds, they're covered inside a fruit, which the ovary is inside the fruit. Okay, so covered inside the ovary, which is developing inside the fruit. Seed plants that produce the reproductive structures are called flowers, as we said, and fruits. So whenever you see a flower plant, you know that it is an angiosperm. Most common examples are lilies, roses. There's a few examples there of two beautiful flowers. There's an orchid, a lovely, lovely flower. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Now, you should recognize this from grade 10. This is a comparison between the two groups of angiosperms, the monocot plants and the dicot plants. Okay, monocots and dicots. This is such a good question to ask, and I'm sure you're going to get this question either in grade 11 or in grade 12, where you have to do a comparison between the monocots and the dicots. And a good way of doing that is in a table form. Now remember, you must be able to do a tabulation. So if they ask you to do a tabulation question, you need to draw a proper table. And if you can remember, a proper table consists now of your border lines, your horizontal lines, and your vertical lines. Okay, so this is a tabulation. Right, let's start with a cotyledon. Now the word mono means one. One cotyledon, and two. Okay, so two. The word monocotyledon, I think this is the word, monocotyledon. That's a short way for monocotyledon. Now if you take a seed of a mealy seed and you take a bean seed, I want you to actually go out there and find a mealy seed and find a bean seed. When you take the bean seed, you can break it open into two parts. Those are the two cotyledons. Cotyledons meaning that it's actually food. It's food for the little embryo that grows inside or that's protected inside the two cotyledons. If you take the mealy pip or the mealy seed, you cannot break it open into two parts. It's only one single cotyledon. Now, when you plant those two seeds, okay, so when you plant the monocotyledon seed, it's going to grow into a monocotyledon plant. When you take a dicot seed, like the bean seed, it's going to grow into a bean seed. Now, as soon as the plants have grown, you can now look at the root systems, you can look at the stems, you can look at the leaves, and you can look at the flowers to distinguish between whether it's a monocot or a dicot flower. Now, let's look at the leaves first of all. Now, I'm sure you can remember this work from grade 10. If you take a leaf and you see a little parallel venation, the leaves, the veins run parallel, that belongs to a monocotyledon plant. When the veins are net-like, so it's got a main vein like that, and lots of little veins that go outwards, that is net venation. Okay? So just by looking at the leaves of a plant. So I would also like you to go outside into your garden, go pick leaves, look at them, parallel venation, net venation. Group them then into monocots and dicots. When you look at the stem, now with the stem you'll have to make cross sections. So these are two cross sections. And I'm sure you've done this in your grade 10 year. Okay, so that cross section, what are you going to see? All these little vascular bundles are arranged, scattered. They're not arranged in a specific order. They're scattered everywhere inside the stem. And what do they look like in a dicot stem? You can remember it's done in a little circle or in a ring. So you'll have to make a cross section of the stem to see the vascular bundles inside. What is vascular bundles? Vascular bundles consist of xylem and phloem. Right, then, if you look at the roots, so if you have to pull the plant out the ground and you look at the root system, a fibrous root system, meaning that growing out of the stem are lots of little roots. And that's called a fibrous, or also known as an adventitious root system. Whereas if you look at the angiosperm, they've got a big taproot and all these little lateral roots growing from this main taproot. Now you would say, why is there a big taproot? Now remember, our angiosperm plants are big trees. They need good support. They need good anchor. They need to absorb a lot of water. So they need a very well-developed taproot system. That brings us then to the flowers. Okay, the flowers of the angiosperm and then the pollen grains of the cones. How can we see differences between monocot and dicot? Now, this is a bit of detail, but if you look at the pollen grain, and you have to look under the microscope, there's actually just one little opening in that pollen grain, whereas the pollen of angiosperm it's just subdivided into three little parts. And that's all got to do with the pollination process. Because remember now, the wind-pollinated flowers mainly is the pine tree. So they don't need to be so well adapted as those pollen grains of the angiosperm. Okay. Now, if you take the flowers, if you take a flower of the angiosperm, all right? And you look at the dicot. And you look at the monocot. Let's just write those two words again. Okay, if you look at the flower parts of a monocot is divided into threes. So you're going to go and count the petals. All the petals will be either in threes or in sixes. So you go 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is a monocot flower. If you count the floral parts, the petals, and there's 4 or 5s, then you know it's a dicot plant. If you go and look on the inside and you count the number of stamens, and there's 3 or 6s, then you know it's monocot. Or if there's 4 or 5 stamens, then you know it's a dicot flower. So if you dissect flowers, you can actually look at the flower number parts of the different parts of the flower and see whether it's mono or dicot. All right. So please, very, very important is this table that you have to know the differences or the comparison between monocots and dicots. And I want you to apply this to your everyday life so that you can get acquainted with all these terminology words. Right. Now that brings us to this flower. Beautiful angiosperm flower and the different parts. This is a very, very popular diagram, a very popular question that teachers love to ask in exams. So make sure that you can either draw this diagram. They might ask you to draw a longitudinal section of the flower or just the external structure of the flower, label it, give the functions of the flower. Let's start with the bottom part here. All right, we have got a little receptacle. Now, what is a receptacle? That part there. Just a common word for receptacle is a base. You're allowed to use that word base, but please make sure that you know the correct terminology for that. So it's a base of the flower where all the different flower parts are attached to. Then you have got 2, or not 2, you've got more than 2, 4 or 5 of these. Yes, then you'll have a dicot flower. Now, on a monocot flower, these little sepals are absent. So if you see a flower without sepals, then you know it's going to be a monocot. If there are sepals, you know it's going to be a dicot flower. So this is a dicot flower by just looking at that little sepals. Now, in a monocot flower, the sepals have fused together with the rest of the flower parts, with the petals. Okay, what's the function of the sepals? The function is, as you can see, they're green. So, because they're green, yes, they can photosynthesize. All right, they can photosynthesize. But their main function is that, have you ever looked at a rose when it's closed in the bud form? All those little green leaves on the outside, those are the little sepals. So the function of those sepals is then to protect the inside of the flower until the flower is well developed enough, and then these sepals will open up and all the flower parts will be exposed. So the other function of the sepals is then protection. Okay, another term here that you need to know is all the sepals together is known as, I'm going to write it, okay, let's just write it there, is the calyx of the flower. So all the sepals together, the 4 or 5, is called the calyx of the flower. Right, let's get to the beautiful colored part, and that is known as the petal. All the petals together, 4 or 5 in a dicot, 3 or 6 in a monocot flower, then that is the color. Beautiful colored petals. What's the function of that? Is to, yes, attract insects. Insects or birds and bees. Why must these insects be attracted to the flower? Is for pollination. Okay, so what the insect's going to do, they're going to see all these beautiful colors. They don't see like you and I, but they're still attracted to the center of the flower. So all the beautiful nectar is down here, right at the bottom of the flower. So what has to happen is that this little bee has to go right inside the flower, and while it's getting the nectar, what's happening here is that the pollen will get stuck onto all its little hairs, and it's doing the function of pollination. I'll get back to that a bit later on. Okay, so the petals is therefore attracting the insects. All the petals together, if you take all the colored parts, we're going to refer to that as the corolla. Now, all these big words, I'm trying to tell my learners, I'm giving them a little few hints so that they can remember these words. And one hint is Corolla. You get a Corolla car. Corolla cars come in different colors. Or you can remember CC, Corolla for color. Just a little hint to remember some of these words. Okay, we're getting to now the male and female reproductive organs inside the flower. Let's start with the male reproductive organs. Right, the male reproductive organs are these little things there. It's a filament, there's another filament, and at the tip of each filament is an anther. All right, so an anther and a filament, collectively known as a stamen, male. I'm going to give you the proper name for this. I think you're going to have to know this for matric. Andrewsium. That's a big word. A way to remember this as well, Andrew. All right, you don't spell it like that, but Andrewsium is just a way to remember it's a boy's name. So that is the male reproductive part of a flower. And what is this anther going to produce is going to be pollen, the pollen grains. And just to give you a bit more information here, by the process of meiosis. Just keep that in mind. All right, so the anther produces pollen grains, and these pollen grains will now be dispersed. How? Now, in flowers, we get different ways of how the pollen is transferred from one flower to the next, either by insects, like bees, I said, wind. If it's a water flowering plant, it will be by water. Now, a lovely question as well, if you look at this flower, they might ask you, is this flower insect pollinated, wind pollinated, water pollinated, or self-pollinated? So some flowers can pollinate itself. Now, if you look at it, it's not self-pollination. Why? Because these anthers, or these filaments, should have been longer. Okay, so if this filament is long, and the anther's there, all right, then the pollen can land on top of the stigma. Then it's a self-pollinated flower. So in this case, it will be an insect-pollinated flower. All right, I think we'll come back to the fertilization process after we had an ad break.
All right.
Thank you, Ty.
No problem. So on that note, mindsetters, make sure you do not disappear or run away from the screen. Make sure you come back because we'll be right back after this ad break. See you soon.